Hello, everyone. This is Natalie Armstrong-Motin with the Marketing Resolution YouTube channel. Thanks very much for watching us today. Today, I have with me a guest from Montreal, Quebec. How are you, Serge? Bienvenue.
Thank you. I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. J'ai quelques questions. I have just a couple of questions about your practice. And so I was wondering, because you have such a unique practice, if you would just briefly introduce yourself and then help us to understand the difference in the processes that you have available for your clients, because you uniquely have a background in litigation, but now I know that you practice mediation, arbitration, and dispute review boards, which happens to be my favorite personally. But for lots of people viewing, the actual process difference between those three things is something they're probably or possibly not familiar with. So would you mind giving us just a brief introduction and then going through the differences in those processes?
Sure. So as you said, I'm a lawyer. I've practiced law for only 2 years, but after that I joined a family firm, a general contracting business. And I worked there for 22 years. So basically, I acquired a management experience, and especially in the management, project management, since at the outset I was involved with legal matters, but then I got involved in all aspects of the business and especially project management. And that for 22 years. And the last 16 years, I've been working on my own and exclusively as a third neutral in the resolution of construction disputes. And when I'm talking construction disputes, of course, I'm talking contractual disputes that might occur during the execution of projects. Most of them are public projects or large infrastructure projects, like, for example, the construction of the new bridge on the St. Lawrence River right here in Montreal, which is a $5 billion project on which they established a dispute adjudication board, of which I am the president, together with an engineer and a chartered accountant, and we've been on the project since its beginning. As for the different modes of resolution, I think there are actually two categories. First of all, the prevention modes.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say prevention, I mean before, of course, disputes arise. And the modes that have been developed in the construction industry for that is partnering and the dispute resolution board, which is different from the dispute adjudication board, but which has a proactive role of trying to avoid disputes on a project, and the project mediator. So both those three modes are prevention modes that parties can use right from the outset at the beginning of their project to prevent. So they have a mostly preventive function. And then on the spectrum of different modes, then you have resolution modes of disputes. And starting with the mediation at the bottom, if you were to see a dispute resolution ladder going up, and the mode at the bottom would be, let's say, mediation, and at the top you'd see arbitration, and of course courts, which is, but I won't talk about the judicial process since it's not an ADR mode, but again, on this ladder you'd see the arbitration at the top. And as you go up that ladder, basically, usually costs increase, and the parties lose, they actually abandon, or not abandon, but they cede the control of the disputes to the third party. So at the bottom of the ladder, you'd have mediation, and of course, mediation is this process where the third party chosen by the parties helps them to negotiate. He's a negotiation facilitator. Of course, in the construction disputes, there are various phases in a mediation where you'd start as a facilitator, and as the process goes on, you might be called upon to play more of an evaluative role in the sense that parties will usually choose an expert in the field to act as a mediator, an expert who knows very well the needs and the interests of the parties, and who knows also very well the major issues that evolve during the construction of a project. So that's at the bottom of the ladder. I do these type of interventions very frequently, either during the project or sometimes at the end of the project, when most of the time all disputes are gathered at the end of the project, and the parties will want to resolve them at that point. If they reach an impasse, they will reach out to a third party neutral, but also sometimes because of issues of prescription of whatnot. So one party has already instituted a judicial proceeding, but they will try to still mediate their dispute. And so I am called sometimes in disputes where there's already court proceedings, but instead of playing out the whole court process, the parties right, the sooner the better, at least, before they start incurring all kind of expenses, they'll want to hire a third-party neutral to help them negotiate the resolution of their dispute. And then there are various modes where the parties are looking to have more of a finality in the process. They'll want the third party to come up with a decision or an opinion, okay? And there are various modes within that range. And that opinion or decision, they will ask that the third party renders a decision or give an opinion which binds them, but is not final. Okay, so in this range of dispute modes, you'll have the dispute resolution board, where the board will render a recommendation. It's an opinion. It doesn't bind the party, but it gives them a recommendation on how to resolve their dispute. And all of these modes, by the way, the interim modes, the outcome of it, whether it be a recommendation or a decision, usually dispute resolution clauses provide that this outcome can be filed in a subsequent recourse if, in fact, the parties want to go further. And this is not this is quite also an important tool. So within these processes, you'll have the dispute resolution board, which issues a recommendation. But you'll also have a dispute adjudication board, which issues a decision this time, which is binding upon the parties. And then you have the adjudication process, the adjudicator, which is a mode that has been used in Great Britain, actually required by law. And even here in Canada, there is a tendency now to incorporate that mode in the law. And so, as in Great Britain, this mode is going to become compulsory now on construction projects, and that it involves a third-party neutral during the course of the work that within a very short period of time is called upon to render a decision that which binds the party immediately, but which can be subsequently contested in a different forum. Okay, so within this realm, you have the dispute resolution board, the dispute adjudication board, the adjudicator. Okay, and then ultimately at the end of the ladder, you have arbitration, where basically again the distinction is the mission that the parties give to the third party neutral, and in that case, in the case of arbitration, which is the most formal of the processes and which usually involves lawyers, of course, because the arbitrator has to render a decision based on law. This process, the outcome of that process is an arbitration award, which is final, which is binding, of course, on the parties, which is final. It cannot be appealed. There are very few grounds for contesting a decision from an arbitrator. And if a party doesn't abide by the decision of an arbitrator, the other party can go in front of the court, have that decision homologated, and then it becomes like a decision of the court, and the party can have a forced execution of its decision if the other party doesn't. So you have there basically what we call the continuum of the dispute resolution processes that have been developed to answer the needs of the actors in the construction industry. And the key word there is the real-time dispute resolution process. The parties, there is too much money involved in disputes in construction. The disputes in construction have a major effect on the collaboration of the project team, which is an essential ingredient for the success of a project. There have been studies that have shown that lack of collaboration of a project team can even reach a loss of productivity of up to 30%. Just to give you an example of the importance of this collaboration. So that's why these actors, they cannot wait years and years and years to solve their problems. There's too much money involved. Most of the time in construction projects, the owner or the party that has the work done by somebody else, by the contractor, has the possibility in his contract to force the contractor to do the work, even though a change work, even though there's still no agreement between the parties. So that's quite an exception to the general rule of contracts. And that exception requires, in my opinion, that if one party can force the execution of a change work to the other party, the counterpart to that is that party that has spent the money to do the work has the right to have a process that will resolve that dispute right away, or at least in a very short time. And that's why there has been a lot of thought into this and creativity amongst the actors of the construction industry to find all kinds of ways to let not disputes drag on because of the cost, and again, because to maintain the collaboration of the project team.
Yeah.
Going back to the prevention modes, partnering is exactly that. Partnering is getting the team right at the beginning or even before a project to get together and to establish or to discuss what are the various challenges, for example, in a project, how to face them, and how to deal with disputes if they arise, and to make a follow-up to their agreement during the process on a regular basis, so that they will not have either disputes, or they will not let disputes fester, let's say, the ambiance of the project.
Right.
So more or less, that's the whole gambit of processes that I'm involved with.
Serge, that was an excellent summation of the different processes, really nicely explained. So one of the primary, for me, drivers behind installing a dispute review board on projects is that, as you mentioned, the owners on these projects, these are really large projects, and historically DRBs are placed on public works projects, bridges, roads, things of that nature. So the owner is us, the taxpayer.
Yes.
And so when there's a dispute on those projects, we, the taxpayer, end up paying for it because delays are money. And they're inconvenience for the people that live around the construction zone, and there are lots of different things. But when you have a DRB on these large projects, it seems to me that the government is then fulfilling its fiduciary responsibility to protect our money, our investment in these public works projects. And resolving, I agree with you, resolving things when they are issues, when we can just have a conversation about it. long before it gets to be a conflict or even a full-blown dispute, that's to everyone's benefit. Because in the construction industry, general contractors know all the subcontractors, and all the subcontractors know all the other subcontractors. Everybody knows everybody. And those relationships are really, really valuable.
Absolutely.
And so when you're able to utilize someone like you, someone like your firm, to help you manage those relationships, to help you manage those costs, help you manage those processes, and help you manage those contracts, I know that to a client it might seem like it's one more investment, it's one more line item in their budget, but actually by hiring someone like you, it's eliminating the line item budget that they all set aside for litigation.
That's true. There's only one thing you were mentioning, and it's true that most of the time dispute boards are used on large projects, but they are also used on mid-size or much smaller projects. And you don't necessarily have to have 3 members of the dispute board. You could have very well one member dispute board, and basically that is also the role of the project mediator. And in terms of cost, there are statistics that have been published by the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation as to the cost. First of all, most of the projects where there have been boards set up, they end up with no litigation. And second, the cost is very minimal compared to, of course, the cost that would be involved in the litigation. So it's still possible on smaller projects to use the same concept, the same rules, or the same and adapt it to one's project. Instead of having 3 people, you have one. Then you can determine the frequency of the visits of that one. Let's say person dispute board on the project. You can determine what kind of documentation you will send. So in other words, there's a way for the parties to design it to their own needs so as to keep the costs lower, and it doesn't. So the idea that dispute boards are only for large infrastructure projects, it can be used for smaller ones. It is used for smaller ones. And again, the beauty with ADR is that the parties decide what they want to do, and they customize the process to their own needs, and that's really the big potential of ADR across the board. Whatever processes we're talking about here, the parties keep control of the resolution of their dispute.
Yeah, and that really, you're right. That really is the genius of what our industry can offer for clients. Is that everything is customizable. And so you can customize it so that you have a DRB on the build of your hotel. And then if things really go sideways, if things are forced through into the mediation funnel. And if mediation doesn't settle it, then they get pushed through to the arbitration funnel. So you can create a continuum that matches your specific budget, your specific time requirements, your specific relationship needs. It doesn't have to be something that is dictated by a court scheme. It can be absolutely exactly what the clients want and need and can afford.
And the way to do it, the best way to do it, is to think about that and have that discussion, or at least that reflection at the time of the contract, when you draft the contract, because so much the better when you can draft this dispute resolution clause where you'd have the continuum of modes, let's say. It's better to do it at the signing of the contract, or when you draft your prime contract, then wait to have a dispute and then have this discussion with the party with which you already are in dispute, to try to first decide which mode you're going to use, second, how you're going to decide on the third, neutral, and what rules you're going to be applying to your process. It can be done, but the better alternative is to do that right from the beginning in the prime contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Serge, if someone's watching this video and they are going to be building a strip mall and want some more information about these processes and which ones should be used and how do they choose timelines and how do they choose people and how do they choose service providers, I know that if I give your website, you won't be offended. And then they can give you a call, they can reach out to you, and you'd be able to help them in that regard?
Oh, absolutely. I do it frequently, but also, at least here in Quebec, we have the Institut de Médiation et Arbitrage du Québec, which is like ADR Institute. There is one across Canada, and there is one in each province. And again, those are nonprofit organizations. I'm a member of all of these organizations, and they have rosters where one party can go there. They see on the roster which are the third neutrals, what are their profession, if you'd rather have an engineer instead of a lawyer or that and that, and who are specialized in construction and in the different area. So yes, of course, there is all kinds of resources available to the person who's looking into, but of course, every time I receive a call like that, it's my pleasure to give the information.
Right.
But I'm not the only one.
No, we have, our industry is growing daily, larger and prouder and stronger, and I love being able to say that. And then you mentioned also that the DRB Foundation have beautiful, sexy, fantastic Excel spreadsheets. Yes. About the efficiency and effectiveness of the DRBs on sites. And I know that if you log on to the DRB Foundation, it's drbf.org, you can find those actual, the factual information about the time savings and cost savings. But I want to give people your website. You have a gorgeous new website, and it is simply your name, Serge Pisapia, PISAPIA.com, SergePisapia.com. And I'll put that, of course, in the description bar below so that people don't even have to think about how to spell your name. They can just click the link and get right to your website.
Very good.
I'm always curious about, people and their practices, and what do you love most about the work that you do?
Well, first thing is being independent and truly independent. I have no boss, and I don't answer to anybody. And actually, the beauty of acting as a third-party neutral is, of course, the more you have to be independent. The first thing, you have to declare any conflict of interest. So that is something that suits me well. I can organize my schedule as I wish. Of course, where you're sitting on a standby committee, it's not as easy because they can call upon you at any time. But other than that, you schedule your own schedule. Yes, and I like being involved in. Especially in mediation, being involved in trying to resolve disputes with the parties. That's the part that I enjoy most, is assisting or getting involved in a negotiation, especially large, complex, multi-party disputes where you get down on the trenches, as I say, with the parties, and you help them to come to a resolution of a process. And if you do, and if that works, it's extremely gratifying, not only for the mediator, but also to see the load off that the parties, when they're facing many years of litigation, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in litigating, when they realize that they can. And besides, a conflict like that eats you, for a long time. You have to spend much energy and time. And so for the parties, when they can get rid of resolve that type of dispute, it's an extreme satisfaction, and that reflects on on the third party was help them reach that goal. So that's what I find most satisfying. Yes.
Yeah, I think most people in our industry would agree with that statement. Absolutely. So, well, Serge, merci bien.
Merci à vous.
C'était un plaisir. I look forward to talking with you again. I encourage everyone to log on to Serge's website, reach out and connect with him. He's a wealth of information about these very different processes and is an extremely generous man in spending time with us today to give an explanation for each of them individually. Thanks again for...
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to speak to you.
Absolutely. Serge, I hope that you stay in contact. To everyone who's watching, be good humans. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.